Have you ever paused to ponder the significance of progressive movements in the society we inhabit today? Progressive movements, the organized efforts to implement reforms in order to improve society, are not just historical footnotes. They are the very forces that have shaped our world, influencing our societal norms and values in ways we may not always recognize. From the fight for women's suffrage to the civil rights movement, from environmental advocacy to the push for LGBTQ+ rights, these movements have been the catalyst for profound change, challenging the status quo and pushing our society forward. They've been instrumental in shaping our understanding of justice, equality, and freedom. These movements have been a mirror, reflecting our collective aspirations and our struggles, our triumphs and our setbacks. They've been a compass, guiding us towards a more inclusive, equitable, and just society. As we delve into the past, we'll unravel the roots of these movements and their lasting impact on our lives. The origins of progressive movements date back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was a time of significant societal change, driven in large part by the Industrial Revolution. This period of rapid industrialization and urbanization brought about profound transformations, not only in the economic landscape, but also in social and political arenas. A wave of discontent began to sweep across the nation as the growing divide between the rich and the poor became more evident. The labor rights movement was born out of this unrest. Factory workers, miners, and laborers united, demanding better working conditions, fair wages, and the right to unionize. They fought tirelessly, often in the face of brutal opposition, to ensure that the fruits of their labor weren't solely enjoyed by the wealthy elite. Around the same time, another powerful progressive movement was taking shape: women's suffrage. The struggle for women's right to vote was a hard-fought battle. Suffragettes, as these brave women were known, faced ridicule, imprisonment, and even violence, but they remained unwavering in their pursuit of equality. Their tireless efforts culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women across the United States the right to vote. Simultaneously, the civil rights movement began to gain traction. While it would reach its peak in the mid-20th century, the roots of this movement were firmly planted during this period. Early civil rights activists rallied against the rampant racial discrimination that was prevalent across the country, advocating for equal rights for all, regardless of race or color. These early progressive movements were instrumental in shaping the course of American history. They challenged the status quo, fought against societal injustices, and paved the way for significant social and political reforms. Each of these movements, in their own way, contributed to reshaping the fabric of the American society, sparking a flame of change that continues to burn bright. These early movements laid a solid foundation for the progressivism we see today. The seeds they sowed have blossomed into a legacy of activism and advocacy, inspiring subsequent generations to continue the fight for social justice and equality. As we progressed into the mid-20th century, the landscape of progressive movements began to shift. The era was marked by a surge of activism, with many groups rallying for change and championing causes that shaped the world we live in today. Let's start with the civil rights movement. In the face of systemic racism and segregation, brave individuals and organizations stood up to challenge the status quo. The likes of Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks became household names, their actions sparking nationwide protests and legislative changes. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark victories that outlawed racial discrimination and secured voting rights for all, regardless of race or color. Parallel to this, the anti-war movement was gaining traction, primarily in response to the Vietnam War. Dissenters protested the government's involvement in the conflict, advocating for peace and diplomacy. Their activism led to a shift in public opinion and ultimately the end of American involvement in the war. The ripple effects of the anti-war movement can still be felt today, with the public remaining vigilant about government decisions regarding war and peace. Lastly, the feminist movement, also known as the women's liberation movement, fought for gender equality. Women demanded equal rights in the workplace, in education, and in society at large. They challenged societal norms and pushed for legislative changes, leading to the passage of laws like the Equal Pay Act and Title IX, which prohibited sex discrimination in education and employment. Each of these movements brought about significant societal and policy changes. They challenged the status quo, pushed boundaries, and demanded equality and justice. These were not easy fights to win. They required courage, resilience, and a strong belief in the power of change. These movements, born of strife and struggle, forever altered the trajectory of American society. Now, as we explore the dawn of the 21st century, we find ourselves amidst a new wave of progressive movements. This era is marked by a surge of activism and advocacy, fueled by the power of the internet and social media, allowing for unprecedented global connectivity and information sharing. In the forefront, we have the Black Lives Matter movement. Born in 2013, this movement rose in response to the violent and systemic racism faced by Black individuals. It has since grown into a global movement, advocating for racial justice and equality, reshaping our understanding of race and the systems of power that govern our societies. Parallelly, the LGBTQ+ rights movement has made significant strides. The fight for equal rights, acceptance, and legal protections for individuals of all sexual orientations and gender identities has been a defining feature of the 21st century. Landmark victories, such as the legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States in 2015, are a testament to the progress made, yet the fight continues. Next up is the climate change movement. With the increasing urgency of the climate crisis, this movement has seen a growing number of individuals, particularly the youth, rallying for government action on environmental issues. Spearheaded by figures like Greta Thunberg, this movement is a call to arms, urging for systemic changes to halt the devastating effects of climate change. And let's not forget about the #MeToo movement, which brought to light the pervasive issue of sexual harassment and assault, particularly in the workplace. This movement has sparked a global conversation, challenging societal norms and demanding accountability. All these movements share a common thread. They are a demand for justice, equality, and a better future. They are a testament to the power of collective action and the ability of ordinary individuals to effect extraordinary change. These movements continue to push for change, shaping the world we live in today and the world of tomorrow. In retrospect, it becomes evident how progressive movements have indelibly shaped the world we live in. They've left an indelible impact, influencing societal norms, values, and policies in ways that we often take for granted in our everyday lives. Think about it. The work week that many of us adhere to, the 40-hour week, is a product of progressive labor movements that fought for fair working conditions. The civil rights that we hold dear, the right to vote, freedom of speech, equality before the law, these are all outcomes of progressive movements that fought tirelessly against systemic injustice and inequality. Progressive movements have also been instrumental in shaping our environmental consciousness. The push for sustainable practices, renewable energy, and conservation of natural resources are all championed by progressive movements, reminding us of our shared responsibility towards our planet. Today, the relevance of these movements is more palpable than ever. As we face societal challenges like income inequality, climate change, and racial injustice, the need for continued progressivism becomes increasingly clear. Progressive movements push us to continually question, to challenge the status quo, and to strive for a better, more equitable world. In the realm of technology, progressive movements advocate for ethical tech practices, data privacy, and digital rights, topics that are of paramount importance in our increasingly digitized world. In education, they champion inclusivity, accessibility, and the dismantling of systemic barriers that hinder learning opportunities for marginalized communities. In the political sphere, progressive movements continue to fight for transparency, accountability, and the protection of democratic values. They serve as a beacon of hope, a reminder that change is possible, that progress is attainable. Progressive movements, as we've seen, have been instrumental in shaping our society and will undoubtedly continue to do so. After all, progress is not a destination, but a journey. So, here's to the journey ahead, to the ongoing fight for progress, for a world that is just, equitable, and sustainable for all. Today, we've journeyed through the history of progressive movements, from their birth in the Industrial Revolution to their continued relevance in the 21st century. We've seen how these movements, born from the ashes of social and economic upheaval, have continually pushed for change, striving for a more equitable and just society. From the early efforts of labor unions fighting for workers' rights to the modern-day movements advocating for gender equality, racial justice, and environmental sustainability, progressive movements have been at the forefront of societal transformation. We've explored their impacts, both big and small, on our everyday lives. They've shaped our laws, our values, and our collective consciousness. They've challenged the status quo and propelled us towards a more inclusive and fair world. As we wrap up this journey, remember that these movements are not just relics of the past, but active forces shaping our present and future. As we look toward the future, one thing is certain: progressive movements will continue to shape our society, pushing us forward on our journey of progress.